Coming up, I show how to remove and replace rear struts on a Pontiac Fiero. Don't forget to thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them all in the comments. Let's do a little bit of unboxing. This video can apply to all models of Fieros, however there might be some slight variations in the process. Interestingly, you can use the 1984 through 1987 struts on the rear of 1988 Fiero. There's a slotted hole here and a stop for the camber bolt to adjust your camber width. For some reason I don't have camber bolts on mine. First, be sure to chock the front wheels on both the front and the rear. Then we're going to jack the rear of the car up, and I like using the engine frame here as a jack point. If you don't have an impact like me, you might want to loosen up your lug nuts before taking the wheels off of the ground. Then go ahead and put your jack stands underneath the car. I really like these jack points underneath the body of the car. You might be able to use jack points underneath the engine frame and start to lower it down. It's not a bad idea to keep the jack there for safety too. Then go ahead and take your wheels off. An impact driver works great for this, but do not use an impact to tighten it on. Use a torque wrench instead. Then you can take off your sway bar end links if your car is equipped with them. You might want to do this on both sides. That way you can bend the sway bar down and a little bit out of the way. Then go ahead and take out the camber bolt and the other mounting bolt. Mine are about 24 millimeters. These can be pretty tight on here, so an impact is a great idea. The sway bar bracket can come off. Remember the orientation of this. These bolts might be a little tough to pound out. My suspension is loose because I just took it apart. You might want to pound on this with a hammer though for a minute or two to get things to break loose. Always put a nut on the end of a fastener before pounding on it because you don't want to mess up the threads. Now you can probably pry it and separate it. If you've got these Rodney Dickman shocks holding up your trunk, you're going to have to prop your trunk up with a broom or something while the struts are removed. 13 millimeter impact should make pretty easy work of removing the strut tower bolts. Put the nuts off to the side and now remove the tower cap. This is how the Rodney Dickman shock mounts to the trunk area. There is a spacer and the other two studs go through his little mounting bracket for the shock. It might be a good idea to have a buddy catch the strut or do this part before you disassemble the bolts on the bottom. Now we just have to finagle it out of here. Again, it works pretty good with a loose suspension. It's a good idea to mark your springs in the top plate before you start. You can rent these strut compressing tools from an auto parts store, typically for free if you return them within a couple days. Make sure you grease up the threaded shaft of these compressors. You're going to put the hooks over the springs, snap the safety pins into place, and you guessed it, we're going to use an impact to compress it down. Be sure to set these 180 degrees apart from each other. You should really think about getting an impact like this. I love my DeWalt's. They'll change your life. Once you have it compressed enough, put your wrench over the nut. Mine happens to be a 21 millimeter on these old Monroes. Here I had to use the impact to break it loose. And grab some vice grips and clamp down on the stud. I use a vice grip to clamp on the other vice grip for leverage. It's a good idea to do only one side at a time so you don't mix anything up. So here's the difference between the old struts and the new struts. I'm going to use some anti-seize lubricant on these because they were a pain to get off. Be sure to wear gloves and don't get this on the strut itself. So we're going to reassemble this thing in the reverse order. There is a rubber grommet that holds the spring on the bottom, and these things are clocked. There is a stop for the spring on the strut itself. I was testing you there to see if you were paying attention because I assembled this thing backwards. So now I'm going to take it apart and do it the right way. The new KYB strut uses a 6 millimeter hex wrench. Make sure the spring is lined up with the line that you drew. So you've got your nut and then this cap that sits on here like this. This guy goes onto the tower this way. You've got the actual top of the tower with the studs in it, a little rubber grommet here, the spring. Now this guy sits inside going this direction, and your strut boot goes over the strut with the bump stop on the top. And here's your rubber damper. So first slide the bump stop on, and then this little cap here, and then slide the shock into the spring assembly. Try to fish the studs up through the holes, and then put a nut on the top to keep it in. Because I didn't mark this one and I actually took it all the way apart, I have it clocked wrong on the top. So I've got to get the spring compressor out and try to figure out the best spot where it's got to be. First try looks like I got it just right. So be sure not to take off the rubber grommet on the top of the strut or move that stuff around at all. And then line everything else up on the bottom. The nuts face towards the front, at least in some of the pictures I've seen. And now's the time to put the camber bolt in the bottom. When you initially install the camber bolts, go ahead and face the long end of the washers up. It seems that the camber bolt is not meant to be installed along with a sway bar option on this car. So in order to get this bracket on, I think what I'm going to do is work around it by putting the camber bolt underneath the sway bar bracket. I'm going to have to shim both washers so that they're exactly the same width, because the camber bolt needs to be able to contact that tab there. So I'm cutting a hole for the shims using a nice DeWalt step bit. Link in the description. Now that the hole's big enough, I'm going to mark this shim down and grind it down to the size. So in goes the camber bolt with the washer on the one side, then the other camber washer, then the shim, the washer on the top, then the sway bar mount, then a lock washer, and then the nuts. Might not be a bad idea to put a washer under these nuts too. It's best to have a couple of threads sticking outside of the nut for engagement. And then replace your sway bar end link. Remember, sway bar end links are only supposed to be tightened until the rubber barely squishes. Refer to my bushings replacement video to see how to tighten up the rest of the suspension and then prepare it to get aligned at a shop. You could try it, but I like to leave that to the experts. I include all torques for the suspension and the strut towers in the description. The trick to aligning it is getting it up on ramps of some sort, so you've got enough clearance under there to tighten up all the suspension. Well, that's it for this video. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'll respond to every comment, and if you'd like to support more videos like these, the link is in the description.